people get logged in. My name is Greg Undo. I'm going to be presenting from Northern Virginia. If you guys want to feel free to introduce yourself. At that point, we could actually start to get an idea of some of the questions coming in. If you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself. We're going to have people get logged in and submit questions. So as we do this, we just want to make sure that you could introduce yourself, and we'll start collecting questions. If you're watching this offline, you may want to fast forward a bit. We'll probably have a link in the video, but you may want to jump ahead like 10 minutes or so over time we let people get logged in and get questions asked. All right, so we have Charles from Edinburgh, or Edinburgh. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. And we had people that emailed questions in. All right, so we had Daryl from Fort Washington, Maryland. It's right across the river from where I live in Alexandria. All right, we have Taylor from Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. I drove through there the weekend before last, visiting family up in Scranton-Wilkes-Barre area, and also family in Pottsville. All right, so Washington, D.C., so a lot of local people. And once again, if you have questions, please feel free to log in. We had questions that were sent in advance, and we have more people kind of getting logged in. All right, so we have, I believe it's pronounced maybe Ruud Jansen from Netherlands. It's great. All right, so more people getting logged in. And if you wanted to, for future Hangouts, if you want to send questions in advance, you could email them to clubcubase@steinberg.net. All right, so we have Italy. I'm glad I didn't totally butcher their pronunciation. I try not to be a silly American all the time. And once again, if you have questions, go ahead and type them in the comments field. We'll collect questions and we'll go get started in a couple minutes. If you're watching this offline, you may want to just fast forward. Usually you may take about 10 minutes to start collecting questions. And again, we had a number of questions sent in advance, so appreciate all the people who do that. It gives me a little more time to prepare. All right, so we have Max from Hanover. We have Dexter from Antigua. in Barbuda. I think that's the Eastern Caribbean. I went to Barbados on vacation once. Beautiful. All right, so we have Matt from North Carolina. I believe it's Antoine in Chicago. All right, so people from Nottingham. From Lithuania. Okay, so we have a question on quantizing electric guitar. All right, so we have Randy from Central Missouri. All right, Richard from Richmond, Virginia. Beautiful city. We go down there a lot for our local club Cubase meetings. Okay, so question on punches. Okay, so people wanting more punch in, punch out help. All right, so other topics. We have some more people logging in. All right, so and once again, if you're just logging in, feel free to introduce yourself and to, if you have questions, type them into the comments field, and we'll go ahead and be able to go through that. So we had some questions on quantizing, questions on vocal line. Okay, so questions on the latency compensation. So we have a question on Hangouts are relevant to beginners. Yeah, we just kind of really answer questions that people, that people run into, anyone that has. So at that point, any questions that you have as a beginner or an advanced user, we just kind of answer questions that are submitted. So. Okay, so just copying over some more questions. Okay, so some questions about workflow and singing 2 different takes. So I see a question from Sebastian on that just says workflow. I don't know if you could elaborate that. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Okay, we'll wait 1 more minute, see if anyone else has questions or could elaborate. Maybe Sebastian, you could elaborate on your workflow comment. We'll go ahead and with that, we'll get started here in just a minute. Okay, thanks for the elaboration. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here in just 1 minute. We'll see if there's any last minute questions. Okay, some more coming in. Okay, we just had a flurry of questions. I'll copy those over and then we'll get started. Okay, so quantizing question. I'll copy over one more. We got just a couple more questions came in. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So we had I'll try to comment when it's available only in advanced versions, but I may forget. So but I'll try to keep that in mind when we're going through some of the questions. Just one more question. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have a lot of great questions, and we'll go ahead and get started. And if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to kind of chime in or make a comment if I didn't answer the question as you would expect. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll start. So one quick question. We had a question on vocal line, if it will be more integrated into Cubase like it is some other programs. So I think with the Nuendo 8 released that they have announced some type of vocal alignment functionality in Nuendo 8, and sometimes when it's going to be perhaps introduced into Nuendo 8, some of that technology can filter down to other versions of Cubase Pro or other versions. So I'm not sure if we'll see. I haven't heard of anything definitively with vocal line specifically, but Steinberg has announced that they are going to be working on some vocal alignment tools for Nuendo that would obviously be applicable probably for also doing stuff in Cubase. So we may see that technology kind of filter in. Okay, so we'll go through some of the questions that were mailed in. So one of the questions was how to use the guitar wah-wah effect in Cubase 8.5, and I'm going to show it in Cubase 9, but this will probably be very similar. So let's take a quick listen to a project here, and we'll find a guitar part. So let's say I'll just take a particular guitar part. And if we wanted to put like a wah-wah guitar pedal on this in 8.5, and it's going to be the same way in Cubase 9. And what we want to do is just as an insert, we'll go to our Vst Amp Rack. And this has a number of different, and this will be found by default under distortion, and then you'll have a Vst Amp Rack. And now at this point, what you want to do, and I'll just choose not the bass amp, but the Vst Amp Rack this time, even though I think we could probably do it with this. And then if we wanted to just use, not only do you have amplifiers and different cabinets that are available, but you could actually choose no amplifier and no cabinet, and just in the post effects you could choose your wah-wah here. So as we're playing back this particular part, we could turn on the wah-wah by clicking here. And you can control that through external MIDI controllers as well. And we bypass that. So we have kind of an auto panner on, but if you want to, you could just set up the wah-wah to do that. So you can treat, and if you wanted to, add a number of other different effect plugins, you can just, you could have, pre-effects or post effects, and at this point you could have any number of different types of different guitar pedals that you wanted to have included within the Vst Amp Rack. So that's how you could use the wah-wah that comes with Cubase Pro 8.5, and I think it's also in Artist. I'm not sure of Elements, but that's how you can do it with kind of the built-in plugins just to take care of that. All right, so another question we had is how to move all my templates and presets such as key commands, color preferences, toolbar, and window layout settings. On the Mac, this would actually be handled just by, let me just hide one thing, sorry about this. And if you go into your Finder, into Preferences, so as soon as you want to go to, at this point, you could just go directly to your different users. So say, in this case, I wanted to go to my user account, and then I think if we go here to our library, you may have to hold down the Alt key, and you just choose to go to library. And then under your library, you'll see it's a little different on PC and Mac, but you could now just come directly over here and you'd see preferences, and then you could scroll down and you'd see Cubase preferences in your list of preferences here. So you could copy your Cubase 9 preferences over from here. On the PC, it's actually going to be, let me just see if I have it in an email. Still no, hang on, sorry about that. But you would go to the Start menu, and then where you would see the actual, where you go to start the program, you go to the Cubase 9 folder group, and then from there you would see all user settings, and you could copy that folder. Now another option, and the reason why I kind of chose those two routes is because you also mentioned color preferences, but a lot of the functions, such as all your key commands, preferences, presets, can also be stored in a profile manager. So you could actually save your profile, and then when you go to actually to another facility or to someone else's Cubase setup, at that point you could just load up your profile, restart the program, and all your preferences would take over. I don't think it includes color preferences though. I ran into that with a user, so you may just have to manually copy those two settings. So on a PC, if you go to like your Start menu and then go to Cubase 9, and you kind of just click without double clicking to launch the program, you would see just like all user settings folder. You could copy that over, and that will do the trick for you. But you could try, you know, to get most of it over directly as a profile as well, and it's a great choice for working that way. Okay, so we had a question: how to move MIDI files and loops from one project to another project. And you know, you can think of, all you have to do is literally for MIDI information is to, you know, when you come here, you could actually just take this and you could export that as a MIDI file, and the MIDI file could be imported into any other program. You could also, if you wanted to save this, if it's being routed to a virtual instrument on an instrument track, you could export that as a MIDI loop. This isn't through an instrument track, so let me just, I'll add an instrument track here just to show you. And let's just come and say we want it to be under our High and Sonic SE. It doesn't work with instruments in the instrument rack. But now that I've added this, and let's just load up a particular sound. So I'll just copy this down to this particular, and now that that is going out to a virtual instrument rack, I could export it as a MIDI loop. And both of these can be, the MIDI loops can be searched for in Media Bay and can be accessed to, it's independent of the project, and it can be accessed directly from any project whatsoever. All right, so another question emailed in. We'll get to some more live questions. Okay, and this question was about stereo pan law on a project setup tab. How does it affect the sound? And this is, you know, there's different schools of thought with stereo pan law. If you're not familiar with this, you know, if you think about, if you double sound, you're adding, you know, 3 dB, you know, through physics. So, but if we wanted to, we could actually choose how the pan law is set. And a lot of people use this to kind of get an edge on their mixes. So if you go to your project window here, and let's get to your project setup, and then we could actually see your stereo pan law set here. So let's go ahead and we'll just you know, listen to it. And as we listen to a particular project, we'll come here and you get an idea. So this will be at 0 dB. And you could May not be the best medium to listen to. So we'll get our bearings. And let's go ahead and set the panel off. So now hit OK. So you can have it a lot wider sounding. And I think by default it's set to -3 dB. So we'll hear it get a little louder, but a little less wide. If we go to 0 dB, you'll hear, again, perhaps get a little louder, but a little less wide, more focused on the center. And again, just as contrast. Jump back to -6. So a lot of people will kind of manipulate the panel law to, you know, really change the sound of their mix if you're going for a particular wide sounding mix, or if it's a very dense mix with, you know, a lot of different elements that you need to pan in your you know, stereo spectrum. -6 might be more appropriate if you're doing something like that really, you know, it's kind of like an EDM track that, you know, is really wants to punch you in the face. You might want to set to equal or to 0 dB. So you could experiment with your mix on that as well and really get a sense of what's going on. All right. So we had a question also in this series of questions sent in by the user was, can I explain about MIDI controllers CC below? The main events in the drum pattern editors, especially pitch bend controller. For example, when I try to use it on a snare roll, it doesn't affect the event on my drum editor. And the reason why this is, it really can depend on a lot of times drum machines and drum VST instruments don't respond to pitch bend. Some of them respond to it, you know, just as you would expect. So it could really depend upon the instrument design. Some people don't want it to do pitch bend specifically because they've, you know, spent ages doing the samples correctly. But, you know, even I think within Halion and Halion Sonic SE that comes with, you know, all the versions, that you could draw in different pitch bend information and the drums will respond. I think some of the kits in Groove Agent will and some won't, but it really depends on the instrument. So if you're drawing in pitch bend for a snare roll and it's not kind of doing it, it's probably a limitation or design consideration of that particular instrument that's causing that. So you may want to, you know, try to just simply, you know, play that roll into a different instrument or use pitch bend within the instrument like you could do within Groove Agent itself. But it's really kind of a design consideration of different drum instruments where a lot of them will specifically not do panning like that. All right, so I'm going to read through some of the comments really quick, and then we'll do some more. We'll see. I've seen a number of comments come in, so let's go ahead and see if there's more questions or comments, and we'll move on. Okay, so I'm just copying over some questions that have come in. Thanks for everyone's great questions. All right, so I'm just going to copy over comments here. Give me just a second, do some housekeeping. All right, so you see a question, why doesn't Cubase support 32-bit VST plugins? So one of the design philosophies in Cubase 9 was to no longer bridge 32-bit plugins because they can cause a tremendous amount of instability. So we've been bridging for almost 13 years, 12 years when we stopped doing it. So some people can still run, if you need to run a 32-bit VST plugin, it's been discontinued or the manufacturer is no longer in business and able to update it. There are solutions like JBridge and some third-party bridging solutions, but for the most part, they will introduce a tremendous amount of instability on your system. So that's why we chose not to continue bridging 32-bit plugins in this day and age. All right, so just copying over a couple of our questions. Okay, just copying over some more questions. Thanks for everyone's great questions and your patience. Okay, just this last one, and we'll get started again. Okay. Okay, so some other questions have come in. How to make chords from plain MIDI notes. So let me just open up a different project here. And we also had a question of, can you do a power chord in the chord track? So let's see if we can get that going. I guess technically a power chord isn't a chord because there isn't 3 tones or 3 separate pitches, but we'll see if we can fake it somehow. So we'll open up this project and let's take a quick look at how you can generate chords based on different events or plain MIDI notes. So I'm not sure if when you say plain MIDI notes, if that is regarding single notes or just like a piano part. So if we have a piano part that looks a bit like this, and let's say we'll just switch it over to our score editor view here. What you could do is to right click, and if you go to chords, or go to chord track, you can say create chord symbols, and that will automatically add the chord track for you and add all of the chord symbols, kind of like so. Let me just move this up here, and we'll make this a little larger and zoom so you can see that. So at this point, it's done an analysis of that MIDI part and automatically created the chords from that. So now, let's say if you wanted to add just like a C5 chord, I don't see that as one of the options. And again, technically, like a power chord isn't necessarily technically a chord. But let's say if I come here and we'll go into our score editor and let's see if we could perhaps make this work here, where we'll go to our other symbols and let's put in a chord here and see if we can define it within the score editor. Yeah, so I don't see a way of adding just like I know in some programs, I think in Dorco, they've added it as a C5 chord, but I don't see a way of having the fifth or just a power chord indicated again, because it's only like, two distinct pitches. So technically, I don't think it is a chord, but I could pass that on as a feature request to have a way of notating that. Okay, so we have a question. How do you manually blacklist a plugin that was previously reactivated? So what Cubase does in the plugin manager is, you'll see it'll do an analysis. And like the first time that you start Cubase, every time that you start it up, if there's sometimes you see it after like a daylight saving times, it'll just do a scan of all the plugins and it does an analysis and tests them for kind of integrity of the system to see if it has been, set up to the point where, and if it doesn't pass that test, it'll show up in your blacklist. So let's say if I wanted to take a particular plugin and let's see. Maybe if you just select it here and go to the plugin information, maybe you could just choose to not have that activated. I don't know of a way. If you perhaps did a new plugin scan, it might be blacklisted again. But let me just see if there's anything in the information window here. But if you want to get rid of the plugin, I think that you could just choose to uncheck the active box. There's probably, if you did a temporary restart and threw out the preferences, that would also include, if you ran it in kind of the safe start mode, that would allow you to have that plugin. You could also just physically remove the plugin from the windows, from the folders as well, and that should do the trick. But give that a try and see how that works out for you. All right, just reading some of the comments coming in. All right, so question, can you have the CMC PD change patterns on a Groove Agent track while playing piano on another track with your MIDI keyboard? Yes, so probably what you need to do when you have the Groove Agent. And one of the cool things that you could do with Groove Agent is to, let's just open it up here so everyone can see it, and we'll do the SE version so that every Cubase user should kind of have a copy of this. And I'll just open up a kit. Okay, so what you could do is, if you have this set up, you know, in Groove Agent, you could trigger different patterns from just kind of different MIDI notes. And if you wanted to have the CMC PD, which is basically a hardware version of 16 pad controls, if you have these set for different MIDI channels, this could be a little easier. So at this point, I could have Groove Agent, and let's put it directly next to, let's say, a piano part. So here, and I'll just open up a just a little tiny fake MIDI controller. So now when I play the piano part here, so, but if I have Groove Agent selected here, it's going to play back both the sounds. And what you want to do is to, if you assign these to different MIDI channels, okay, then you could use what's called the input transformer. And then we could set this to local. And what the input transformer will do, it will allow you to take different MIDI channels or different controllers and be able to kind of map it out accordingly. So let's say we could set this to local, and then you get this really kind of and this could be a little confusing at first, but once you understand kind of the logic of it. So let's say at this point I wanted to filter out particular channels. So we could say we want to choose filter, and then we could say type is, and we'll say channel, and we want to say basically unequal to channel 1. And for our drums, we may want it to be unequal to channel 2. So again, we would choose filter, and then we want to filter channels unequal to 2. So you could have your pad controller just doing the particular drums, and then once you're here and you have both of them going to different controllers, I don't really have the ability to set up my different controllers here, but you could have the different MIDI channels inputted, and that way they could only go to those particular tracks as you have them. So try using, again, the input transformer, and with that you'll see this, just this little squiggly line here, and then you could just simply set it up to, once again, set it to local, and then filter by channel types. And then you could have your different controllers on different MIDI channels as they transmit, and that should allow you to have, like, you know, different instruments or different controllers going to different tracks. Okay, so we had a question. Is there a way to close multiple gaps between multiple events after cutting them? Give us a try. And I think perhaps Might look something kind of like this. Okay, so I think this is probably what the question is about. So let's see if you just, and I could be totally misunderstanding this, but if you glue it together, that you still kind of have the different events, but just kind of select all, like do a lasso around the events and see if this isn't answering your question. Just if you don't click on it with the eraser tool, but with the glue tool, that'd be helpful. And if you hold down, we'll just select all of these and glue. I think that might do what you want. If not, just send clarification, and then we'll work on that if we need to change it. All right, so I'm just gonna read through some of the comments and copy over some of the, if we have new questions. Okay, question is, I'm trying to get a Cubase file from a friend, but he has all the audio files in one folder, every recording he has ever done. Is there a way to export the parts that are only used for that particular project? Yes, and there's a great way of doing this. What you could do, and I've seen, top record producers, have, 3 years worth of audio files all in the same audio folder. But all you have to do is tell your friend to go to your file, and then you'll see an option here that's backup project. And what this will do is it'll ask you to define a new folder. So I'm going to just create a new folder. And at this point, we could select a backup folder. You give it a name, and what you want to do is you could, choose to keep the current project active. But at this point, you want to minimize audio files and remove unused files, and you could also freeze edits. And at this point, that will save all of the files needed for that particular project to play back as is into that new folder, and have your friend compress that folder or put it onto however he wants to pass on the files to you. But once again, just simply go to your file menu and choose backup project, and that will allow you to define a new folder, and to and with those different preferences once defined, to have only the files used in that project and not every single file in the folder, which probably has a lot of the files named the same. That will be copied directly to a new directory, and then you could just simply get that directory to pass on to get on your end, so you could open up the project in your Cubase. Okay, just reading through some of the comments, and we'll get back. All right, so just reading through some of our questions have come in. Okay, so is there a way to copy hit points detected in one track and paste them onto another track trying to edit guitar DI with two mic tracks together. The hit points are automatically detected, usually by default, as soon as the audio has been recorded. So it's a preference that you can have, so that as soon as the audio is actually recorded, that all the hit points will be automatically calculated in the background. So you don't really have to copy them, but it seems like you wanted to do editing of like multiple guitar parts. So let me just close this and let's activate this project here. And probably what you want to do in that scenario, if you want to edit the two of them together, what I would try is, let's say here we're going to have like two guitar parts, is I would put these two guitar parts into a folder, and we could just right click and say move selected tracks to new folder. And as we do that, you can actually choose to do group editing. So when you have like two parts that have been, kind of doubled, and it wasn't in this case, but and then as you do edits to one, both of them will kind of be tied together. So I would, again, take the two guitar tracks, put them into a folder, like so, and then select it, right click, move selected tracks to new folder, and within the folder track, you have this option for group editing. And I think that will take care of the edits that you want to do. There's two parts of like a mic'd and a DI guitar part. So I think that'll do it. And again, the hit points don't need to be copied because they've already been, they've automatically been, calculated, like as you're recording the files. So give that a try, and I think that'll do the trick for you. All right, so I've seen a comment, can we have a better macro system like the Slate system? There's a lot of, very powerful things, you could do in the macros, but if you have any suggestions for features in the macros that aren't there, there's a lot of functions in macros that people don't understand or can miss. So if there's a particular function, I know the macros don't do everything, but I think it does quite a bit currently. But if there's a particular function that you're looking for to do in a macro that's not there, just please leave it in the comments, or you could email to me at clubcubase@steinberg.net. I see a lot of people, using that system to try to get the functionality of macros in Cubase and other DAWs. And it was kind of the idea was to kind of give some of that Cubase functionality to other DAWs that didn't have it. So, but if there's particular functions, I realize it doesn't do everything, but in combination with like, logical editor or project logical editor presets, you could do some really powerful things. Okay, so just reading this question about kind of how to get a rhythmic guitar to follow parts. Let me just read it through real quick. Okay, so the question is about kind of taking a non-rhythmic element of guitar and having it follow different tracks. Let me just go to another part here, another project, and we'll take a look. I may not have a non-rhythmic guitar part, but I have a couple different guitar parts to work with here. And then basically I want to take a non-rhythmic guitar part and work with that kind of rhythmically. So let's see if we have something that's a little more less rhythmic. I think I have some more atmospheric stuff going on. All right, so if you have kind of just like an idea of, we'll take this. I know this is probably a little more rhythmic than maybe what the question was intended, but let's just take a. So one of the things that you could do is we'll just start maybe. You know, sometimes just being able to, let's say I'll just come here and we have our markers kind of defined, you know, as we mentioned before. So I'll just kind of go to the editor and let's go to, let's say, just hit points. And then again, you can kind of adjust the threshold here a little bit. Now, if it's not terribly rhythmic, you know, you may have to just kind of define the tempo for the audio file itself. And you could do this, you know, in the easiest way maybe to go to the pool window and just to kind of give it a particular stacked value. So let's say if I wanted to come here and see if I could find this particular file. Okay, so just kind of, again, okay, so here's our file, and you know, right now I just want it to be, our tempo roughly is 97 beats a minute. So I'm going to just enter in 97 just as a ballpark, and then just kind of put it into our reference and put it into musical mode. So now, let's say as I just change my tempo of this particular, I'll change it to 112. And we'll try just. Try 122. And first thing I want to make sure also that this part is set to musical mode. And let's say 156. And you can hear it kind of speeding up and slowing down. So it might make sense to kind of just do a static tempo value and just kind of place it into musical mode and play around with it. Also, one thing that a lot of people do, and we'll just show this a little larger, if you needed to kind of rhythmically edit stuff, is to kind of do some different, sorry about my microphone, is to do some different warping technology. So you could also just kind of put stuff into free warp and be able to kind of just say, okay, I want this element to be here. And then you could kind of just free warp audio as well. So I know sometimes it can be hard if it's not rhythmically based, but I think kind of between those two that you get a sense and try out some different ideas to make it work for you. I'll just revert this real quick and go to another question. Okay, so the question is, how can I use Irig Pro on Cubase, on Mac Cubase? So it should be, I believe that's just your audio interface. So at that point, all you'd have to do, if it has a core audio driver, just go into your device setup, and then under VST audio system, you could select your Irig Pro. So I believe that if you're using it as a MIDI interface, it will just kind of show up under your MIDI port setup. But I believe if you're using it as an audio capture device, if we're using an Irig Pro, you can just simply just select it in your device setup and then just select the core audio driver on your Mac. Okay, so we had a couple questions about, and today as well as Peter had sent in a question asking about kind of using the zones and focus and key commands. And Peter, I see a question how to kind of change the focus here on the different zones. And Peter actually, he wanted to be able to switch between different editors within the zones as well. So we'll show you that. So it's going to be Alt Control or Command Control L will or Command Option L will take your inspector on and off. Command Option T for your transport. Command Option R for your right, and Command Option E or Alt Control instead of Command Option. So if I want to go Command Option E, that opens up the editor and closes the editor, and then L on the left hand side opens the inspector, and then R opens up your VST instruments or media bay, and Command Option or Alt Control T your transport. Now each of these has many of these zones has different editors as well, and we notice that we have the active zone here kind of highlighted in white. So if I zoom in, and while I see my mixer is highlighted in white, I could use the G and H keys to zoom in. But if I just hit the tab key, we can see that the white outline is on the inspector. Now the white outline is on the project window. So now when I zoom here, it's only going to zoom on that particular zone. So just hitting the tab key will navigate between the four zones. And I think if you hit Control, Tab, or let me just get my modifiers right. So just your tab key, and I think if you hold down maybe Control Tab or Shift Tab, that will switch the direction. But there's only 4 tabs. So the tab key will allow you to switch between those. So if I just wanted to zoom in on the project window, hit the tab key again. Now I'm zooming just on the actively selected mix console window. Now Peter's question was, how do I switch between the different editors? Or like here, I could have channel visibility as a setting. I could switch between VST instruments and media bay. And he, his quote was he wanted to be a key command ninja on this. So it's just going to be Alt Control or Command Control, left, right arrows, depending on the active zone. So here I could see the inspector. I could see the editor for the edit tab. So say if I'm here, I can see the channel visibility and also different zones. So when I now wanted to come here to, let's say, my mix console, I could switch between the editor. And again, it's just going to be, let me just get my key command sorted out here. So it's just going to be kind of Alt Control LR. Let me just, and the left right arrows we'll do it. Let me just, might be different on the Mac. But I know on the PC it's just Alt Control left right arrows, and that will allow you to toggle between the different zones tabs here. So let me just see if I have this. Yeah, so just Alt Control and left right arrow. So now if I switch my zone here, Alt Control left right arrow. And again, if I come here, Alt Control between my 3 different zones, and also, so this way you can very, very quickly navigate. So, so Alt Control or Command Control on Mac and left right arrows allows you to toggle between the different options within the currently active zone, and you can see the currently active zone by the white outline. So makes it pretty fast to navigate, all using keyboard shortcuts and key commands. All right, reading through some of the comments for other questions. All right, so we have a question, can a score be placed in the bottom zone? You may notice that I did this. Let me just come here. So when you go to the editor here, and you have 3 different choice of editors. So I can see it as kind of my key editor. Or I could see it as, and if you see on the edit zone here, just then you could choose the drum editor or the score editor, just like that. So that's how you could get the score editor in the bottom zone. So you can switch between key editor, drum editor, or your score editor. All right, just reading through some of the comments and questions. Thanks for everyone's great questions. All right, so just reading through some questions. I'm seeing a question on audio warping with drums and some of the edits, creating kind of pops and clicks. You know, if you do the group, you know, depending on what type of editing that you're doing for drums, there could also be like more of a hit point detection when you do kind of the multi-track quantize that, you know, some cases audio warp, where it's kind of stretching the audio, works a little bit better, but you could also explore some more, you know, working with hit points, and we'll go ahead and show that real quick. All right, so let's say I'll just so kind of depending on, you know, different you know, drum editing, like sometimes people want to have the drum edits a little more tight to the click. like especially with drum fills. At this point, what you could do is kind of just select all the different parts, and you want to move them into the folder, and you want to find the hit points for different types of drum tasks. So we can set your threshold kind of accordingly where you don't have tracks that are bleeding through. So let's say I want to find my kick, snare, and hi-hat in this case. And we're kind of not allowing kind of unrhythmically significant parts of the tracks that are bleeding through. Like you may have a lot of kick and hi-hat on the snare mic, etc. So once we have these set, you know, you could kind of do the warping like we showed earlier, but if we set it into kind of group editing, now this will all be tied together, and you could go into some of your drum edits, and you could assign your different tracks here. So you can say kick has higher priority than snare, and you could say hi-hat has lower priority. Now at this point you could choose to, you know, there's two different ways you could do it. You could do it through kind of audio warp or slicing, but if you just kind of choose to slice your audios, slice the audio files, at that point we could choose, we're going to slice that and say we want it to be 16th notes, and then at this point you could choose to quantize, and then once they've kind of been shifted, you can crossfade. But another method of doing it is kind of audio warp. But, you know, depending on the source material, you know, if you've, and that could tighten up stuff, you know, if you do like really extreme free warp audio changes, you know, it may introduce some artifacts, you know, because depending on what it's doing to, you know, make that audio fit within that. So there could be different approaches to that. So you can do kind of free warping or audio warp, which can do time stretches, or just kind of repositioning slices by hit points. So, and they're all valid for different types of scenarios. So you give that a try, and I think that will help out. Let's go ahead and look at our question. Okay, so we had a question from Charles about playing the video back at half speed. So it's an interesting question. So let me just open up project where I have some video. Here we have some here. And the question was like how to play back a project in video at half speed. I think it was for MIDI recording, and I'm not sure if this technique is going to work for MIDI recording, but it will perhaps give you an idea. Now there's a key command, and these used to be located on the transport bar, and then it kind of disappeared. And it's under transport, and there's shuttle play half X, 1/2 X, so 1/2 times. So let's say if I'm playing back a particular project. Now a lot of times the video is kind of set at particular, you know, timing values, but if you're kind of writing to video, you could actually just kind of trigger, I'm just going to trigger a key command here. And I can play back the audio. So I just assign that to command control H.
The world with hate. We have developed speed.
And as soon as I let go of that key command, and you could assign this to any function. As soon as you hold it down, it's just doing kind of a jog shuttle at half speed. And you can do double speed as well through different key commands. Now, one thing that's also helpful if you're kind of doing a lot of MIDI stuff and composing to film is, to film, the highest resolution is generally going to be the frame. So one thing that's not active usually by default will be the nudge palette. So as soon as I turn on the nudge palette, you could set your master time here. And again, you could kind of set your master time here to be, let's say, in time code or frames. And then at this point you could actually move right, and as you kind of nudge, let's say, I think if I that was just a right click on here. Let me just get the all transport here real quick. And we're going to set this to time code here as our master. So then as you nudge, you can move right, and you could just nudge by like one frame at a time if you wanted to. So if you have particular MIDI events, you could just simply choose to nudge by, and it's kind of set by the time code value. But again, if you just want to kind of audition, just set up that key command, and then the video itself will play back at half speed. So once again, it's one of the transport key commands, and it's just shuttle play at half speed, and you have some other options here as well. So you could set your own key command just to do that. So give that a try, Charles, and see if that works for you. I'm not sure. I don't think you could actually record MIDI at that rate, but you could slow it down, record without the video being perfectly in sync, but you could do nudging to place it at the appropriate video areas. So okay, so question, let's see, how can I move? Okay, so a couple questions about some mixer paradigm. So let me just I just read through a couple questions and comments here. Okay, so question is, can I delete separate output channels from the mixer that were created by Contact Symphony essentially when trying out song transcriptions? This might be like as you kind of see your different outputs here. So let's say when I look at Hallion here, what we want to do is you can see any number of different outputs. So it probably works the same way with your Contact, where you could just from the Contact instance here, just turn off those particular outputs. And I think that will eradicate them from the mixer, so you don't see them because they won't be, the instrument won't be outputting them. So I think that'll work for you to get rid of the kind of unnecessary outputs in the mixer as well. Okay, so just reading through some other comments. Thanks for everyone's great questions. All right, so Greg Clemmer turned 61 today, so happy birthday. Okay, just going through some comments, see if there's our questions, and if not, we'll get to some of our questions that were sent in earlier or in advance. Thanks for everyone's patience. Okay, so comment on the macros. It says when creating macros, are the steps only able to be added linearly, or can you arrange the sequence of tasks? They are linear, and what some people do is actually, you could create a different macro for different orders of events. But you could also do stuff like have a macro that actually runs multiple macros as well. So, and just let me go back to some of our comments and questions have come in. Okay, so let's go through some other questions. We had a bunch that were sent in advance. Can I record VST? This was sent in today. Can I record VST audio directly in Cubase Artist 9? So often, I'm not sure if this might be a Cubase Pro only feature, but we'll show you we'll show you how to do it if it was able to be done in Cubase Artist 9. Sometimes I work primarily with the big gun. So I'm just going to add a track instrument here. So there's two different ways of having audio kind of recorded internally through some kind of internal routing, and I did a video on this on kind of the Q&A series that's on the Cubase YouTube channel as well to kind of show this. So you can kind of create, and it could be a little more straightforward, I realize that, but there's ways to kind of get it done. So if we have kind of audio playing, I could add a group track, and again, I'm not sure if this is a Cubase, it may be a Cubase Pro only thing. And then I'm going to add another audio track here. So what I want to do in the output of this audio track so I'll just come here and say this is our audio output here of the virtual instrument. Okay, and what I want to do is to send it to group 1. All right, so now when we go to group 1, we can see that signal is getting into group 1. And for this audio track, we want to set the input from group 1. So now I come here, and when I hit record, and what's also interesting is you can take Groove Agent, the MIDI information here, and at the same time it could actually record the MIDI information from Groove Agent. So I'm going to select the audio track and the MIDI track. And as we do this, we can see that the MIDI is being recorded at the same time the audio is. So again, what I'm doing is I'm routing the output to a group. The group doesn't have to be assigned anywhere. And the group, so the audio out of the instrument and the MIDI is going into this channel. The audio is being passed to the group, and the audio output of the group is being routed to the audio channel and being recorded simultaneously. You could also do this through kind of creating like almost a phantom output. And again, the output doesn't have to be assigned, and then you could assign the output to inputs. So if you were to do it in Cubase Artist 9, that would be the method to record it. You know, you could obviously render files or do an export audio mixdown to get those included, but that would I know you could do that in a pro version, but if you wanted to record it in real time, that would be the method I would try. So give that a shot and see if that helps. All right, so question, do I have any recommendations on what algorithms to use for time stretch audio warp? Do some work better for some instruments more than the standard ones like pad, drums? Generally, I think what you'd find a higher quality algorithm would probably be the Elastic. So we have these, and these are, work very well, but they're kind of legacy versions. And I think from version 3 on, we incorporated the Elastic algorithms. And you have we can think of time in pitch. So a more rhythmic element, you may want to have time. Like drums, for instance, may be time. If you have like vocals, guitars, pianos, basses, pitch may be better. And you could set those, and you could really kind of experiment, and also for pitch, you could also have, formant control. So for vocals, you'd probably want formant control, and it could be different for every different instrument on every different project, how it was recorded. So just kind of play around with it, but I would kind of start with the Elastic algorithms. If you're you have kind of like the eco modes, and we could think of those as, the efficient modes here. So if you have kind of a slower computer, or if you're doing it on 400 tracks, you may want to use that. For vocals, you may want to work with the formants, and then it's kind of whether it's rhythmic or more pitch-based instruments between time and pitch. But I would kind of err on the side of using the Elastic algorithms. Okay, so just... Okay, so we have a question on any updates from Germany on a new video components yet. They did make an announcement that they do expect it perhaps in the next maintenance release of Cubase. It is currently released in Nuendo. So I think it might be the next maintenance release might have that in, and there's kind of an official statement from Steinberg on it that was released shortly after the Nuendo release. Okay, just going back through some other questions raised earlier in the comments field here. Okay, so we're seeing questions about with the Dante. And Dante, if you're not familiar with, is a way of kind of passing audio over Ethernet cables. So it says I'm still having problems assigning project tracks to the channels coming from my Yamaha TF1. I must be doing something wrong in setup. I have the same issue with Audinate Dante, and you have the MY64 card. Once you have, it could be that you just have your assignments, and you may just have to kind of do routing within the Dante control panel. To make sure that like input 1 is going to output 1. But once you have that matrix set up, and I don't think I have it on my Mac here, but you could go into your VST connections and you should see all of the available inputs. And if you just click on add bus, you can say I want to add 24 Dante inputs here. And then it will automatically, sorry about my microphone falling. It will automatically then, assign them incrementally. So make sure that within the Dante, control panel, there's a little matrix that you could use for editing the assignments and make sure. But once you have those done, all those available inputs will be available for Cubase. Okay, so let's go ahead through some of your questions that were sent in. Okay, so we had a question. Can you explain demo what the ASIO latency compensation button in the track controls does? And this is always an interesting, I believe it's moved recently within version 9. So it's actually down here. So generally what you have is like this little button here that does compensation, like latency compensation, and used to be kind of in the upper left-hand corner, and it's moved down to the transport, and it's a constrained delay compensation. And generally the only time that I tell people, and this kind of allows you to do different compensations depending on latency for like incoming virtual instruments, and perhaps if they have plugins on them. The only time I really tell people to toggle the status is if they're playing and it seems like the latency is beyond the typical latency of an audio interface, where it's actually to the point where it's like, okay, this is feels a little like something is wrong, like the timing is off, because the program has to take a lot of different components into account when you're playing MIDI. So if you have MIDI and you have plugins on it, not only is there going to be latency of your MIDI interface, but of the audio interface that's playing that back, and any additional compensations for plugins or real-time plugins that you may have on that particular track. So when people will call me up and say, oh, my MIDI timing feels really off when I'm inputting, I just tell them to toggle that status, and that generally kind of fixes it for them. So if you're not noticing a huge problem or it's not bothering you, you could leave it alone. If you feel that something isn't being delay compensated right on real-time MIDI input, then you could just toggle the status of that button. Okay, so some other questions. Okay, so we had a question about being able to move particular tracks around, like in the mix console. So let's come here. And I'm just going to filter out all my input channels that I've just added. So what you can do, and I know this seems can seem a bit counterintuitive. Like a lot of people want to be able to take their group channel and be able to move it in the mix console, which kind of makes sense with everything else that you could do. But anything that you move directly on the main project window carries over directly into the mix console. So if you have, let's say, a number of audio channels, let's say we have 8 drum channels, and now there's some things that have been kind of made a little easier. So let's say I have a number of these audio channels here, and I'll just hold down the shift key to select these. And let's say I have these all at the top. So when adding, and this came in 8.5, when we add, let's say, a group channel, there's some new options that can make this a little easier. One is you could, when you go to add, let's say, a stereo group, there's 2 options, and they're kind of not ideally named for what you think. So there's one that's called Create Inside Folder, and that would place it at the very bottom within all the folders. But you could also just choose Outside Folder, and we could think of Outside Folder as being actually below selected track, below last selected track. So if I now choose Create Outside Folder and I hit Add Track, at that point it's going to go directly to the bottom now of the selection. So if I selected these and I add a group channel, and as we come here, say, and I choose Inside Folder instead, it's automatically going to move to the group channel folder kind of way at the back here, way at the bottom. So if you have kind of big projects, but if you needed to physically just drag it up here, and I know it doesn't seem like you should need to do that from only the project window as opposed to moving it. Hopefully we'll see this in a future version. I know it's been very, often requested, but hopefully that'll make a little more sense. And we'll have that functionality in the future. But as you add it, you can choose it to go below the selected tracks by choosing Outside Folder. And we could do this again with other tracks like VCA or effects channel tracks, or you could just physically just move it wherever you want on the project window, and that carries over directly into the mix console view. Is kind of built upon this. So hopefully it'll be a little more flexible in the future. All right, so let's look at some other questions. Okay, so question, is there a key command to let you solo each track in turn up or down on the main panel? So I assume this is the main project window. And this is actually a preference. So I believe if we go to preferences, and I believe it's going to be under project editing, project and mix console. And then there's enable solo on selected tracks. And you could set up key commands to do that. So as I select a track here, and let's see if I just have that soloed. Just make sure I get the preference set correctly. I'll just untoggle. So once you have that preference set, you could just now, whatever track you have selected in the mix console, you can solo just by having it selected like so. So once again, it's going to be under preferences, project mix and mix console, enable solo on selected tracks. So I think that'll do what you want. Okay, so this is kind of a great question on if you take a MIDI file from a notation program and then you want it to sound musical and you don't want it to sound like it's machine like generated. So let's I think I have a project that fits this criteria. Open up a Bach piece. So often when people enter in stuff in notation programs, they can be very rhythmically precise. And it used to be kind of the old school thinking that you use a notation program, enters it in, but sometimes when it plays it back so machine-like and so heavily quantized that it could be problematic for it to sound kind of realistic. And that could be a problem because sometimes things can be so heavily quantized as like a machine, and maybe in Baroque music that's appropriate, but when people are entering in absolute values, it's not how musicians would often play it back. So there's a couple of little tricks we could do. So let's take like a Bach piece here. So if you go into your MIDI, there's a couple of little things you could do. One is, and this may be kind of hidden from view, but if you actually just kind of right click and you want to go into the Midi Modifiers, I believe, and here you could have some randomization of different points. So you can say, I just want to randomize the position ever so slightly. And this could also kind of randomize the velocities as well. So if it's putting in the same velocity for every single note. Now also when you get to your MIDI inserts, there's a Quantizer plugin. And if you even, swing sounds really good on Baroque music. So you can kind of change the feel of different parts here. Now, you could also, if you, play something in with a particular feel, what you're able to do, like in MIDI or within audio especially, if I had a drum loop that I really liked the feel of, you just find a drum loop here. So let's say even if we have a totally generic sounding drum loop here with a feel, you could actually just kind of do the hit point detection. And then kind of as you adjust the threshold here, you could actually create different quantize presets or grooves. So at this point, you see right here, create groove. And then when you go to actually quantize different elements, at this point, you could actually quantize based on different grooves if you wanted to. So, you could try to do light quantization of, putting in like an ever so slightly triplet value, but try to make it sound more human. The randomization found in the Midi modifiers can make a big difference, and also just kind of doing the quantize plugin, and that doesn't affect the actual notes, but it just kind of processes it in real time, so everything will still look kind of as you expect in notation. But yeah, it's kind of tough sometimes. You see a composer that's done so much to get everything presented right visually, and you listen to it and it just doesn't convey any passion. And doing slight tempo variations also can make a big difference, because real orchestras will speed up and slow down to accommodate the different music parts. So, okay, so let's go through some of the other questions, or check out a couple comments. Okay, so just reading through a couple comments coming in. So thanks for everyone's patience. Okay, so question, I'm just going to read this. I'll just take the mic here over. So the question is, I've got a problem, can't see my Samson USB microphone. And then I use Line 6 UX2 audio device, and also use ASIO drivers in Cubase. When I change for ASIO for all, I can freely use both. Let me just make sure I'm just. When I change for ASIO for all, then I can use both at the same time. Why? Because the reason why you have one ASIO driver on Windows at a time, and that's because often the devices can get out of sync with their clocks, because there isn't a real way for the digital audio clocks to be in sync. You can do some aggregate devices on Mac, but that does compound the latency, so which can make it a little impractical for a lot of people. But if you have, just try to make sure, if you have two different USB audio interfaces, maybe just, might be cheaper just to get a mic and plug it into your Line 6, and it might be a better tool to use, or just monitor off of, one of your devices. So instead of trying to make two devices, the one device you need, you can check out, even Steinberg has like UR interfaces starting around $100 with a mic pre that's USB, made out of steel, with the line level input that does 192K with great latency. So you may, if you wanted to use the ASIO for all, you could use both. It's kind of a workaround, but it sounds like you may want to investigate getting a better, more suitable interface for your needs. Yeah, also seeing comments on the timing, MIDI timing being too static from a notation program. There's also the push back and push forward from the logical editor as well, can also kind of free up things. Okay, so just going through some more of the comments are coming in, and we see a couple questions we'll go through. Okay, so question, Cubase, is there a shortcut to put markers over your recording? So there's a couple ways to add markers. Like on a PC, you could just hit, you could just simply hit the insert key, and that's the marker. You could assign a key since there isn't an insert key on Mac. But what you could do is, also if you have a marker track, so let me just add a track, and we'll add just a quick marker track here. And now at this point, as we're doing it, and you could assign your own keyboard shortcuts, but as we play back, you could just kind of click on to add markers. Or if you have a range selected, like if I have that range selected, there's also cycle markers that you can add just by clicking on, like I want that as a range, so you could have your cycle markers added. So, that's a easy way to kind of, to set your markers for particular ranges. If you want to set like the left and right locators for a part, you could just select a range and hit the letter P, and that will set your left and right locators. So we had some questions also on punch-ins, and while we're here, let me just review those. Okay, so I'm just looking for I thought I copied the question over. Okay, let me, I'll go back. If someone who asked a question on punches, if you want to ask that again later in the comments field, I'll see if I can dig it up really quick here. Just give me one more second. Thanks for your patience. All right, so one question I just saw in scrolling back, what's the difference between instrument tracks and instrument racks? Historically, there were more significant differences. So we have kind of instrument racks, instrument tracks. So it used to be that instrument, historically, when it first was introduced, instrument tracks were set up to be a little easier, but it had some limitations of one, they can only be monotimbral. So you can only put one MIDI channel and one stereo out. Whereas if you're running an instrument with multiple MIDI channels, you could run it in a rack with multiple outputs. And that limitation in, I believe, 7.5 kind of got resolved, where we could add multiple outputs to different MIDI, to instruments in a instrument rack. The two are really very similar, but an instrument rack will consolidate the audio and like the audio mixer channel settings directly with it, whereas it could be kind of disassociated with an instrument rack. So a MIDI track can be routed to an instrument track, but an instrument track is only routed to an instrument track. So, and one of the minor differences is with the instrument track, you can't do MIDI sends, like MIDI send effects. So, and that could be, not a big deal for a lot of people, but that is one of the standing differences. But, and when you generally add in track in an instrument rack, it'll have a separate MIDI fader volume as well as a separate audio channel, where that again will be consolidated in an instrument rack. So while they started off being kind of different, they've really kind of merged to be more similar over the time. All right, so just look for punch-in question. So if someone asked that, if they see that question, I'm just scrolling back through some of the comments here, see if I can find it real quick. If not, we'll move on. Okay, so I just found a question. So the question is, how can we set up like a punch-in for a selected region? Okay, so when we kind of have this set up, I'll just do a new project here. This will be a little easier to see. Okay, so one of the things that you could do is actually just kind of hit I and O for punch in, and this will be your punch in I and punch out O. So if you wanted to set, let's say if we added an audio track here, and let's say if I wanted to, and it used to be that the punch in was automatically set by the left and right locators at all times. So if I have my left and right locators and I have punch in activated on a transport here, so we can see punch in and punch out, that when we get to that moment in time, the program would automatically punch in to record. If I have it set up right, let me just... So you could set it up like that, but now you could also set up other points where if you wanted to have, let me just make sure that this is kind of set up for my VST connections here. We can also do it for MIDI as well. So. Okay, so it's generally just tied to the left and right locators. Not sure why it's not going now, but now what you could do is actually just set it up for punch points as well, where we could say, and maybe this is what it's on. So if you go to the transport menu, you'll see punch points. Okay, so right now I'm going to say set punch points to locators. And now when I play, we'll see the track punch in and punch out. So let's say I'll take off my cycle marker here. And as we play, the track will automatically punch in, and then at the end of the right locator, punch out. Now, some people want it to have kind of a different scenario where we could have punch points. So what this would allow you to do is, let's say I have an audio track. I'm going to grab my range selection tool, and I want it a bit of pre-roll, like before and after. So if you go to the transport menu, we could add punch points, and we could set these manually, but I like to just set the selection range. And now we see these little red dots. And what this is going to allow you to do is I could cycle this purple range here and then just have it punch in directly within just that specified region, like so. So you see punch in, I'll just chord enable that. So now it's just going to punch in, punch out, cycle, punch in, punch out, cycle. And again, you just want to make sure that you have the I and O, and we can see this just on the transport bar down here, activated and turned on. So you could have it tied directly to the left and right locators by default, but again, under transport, go to your punch points, and then you could just set it manually for your left, or just do the selection range, and then you could set a loop point that's independent of your punches. So I think that'll do the trick for punch-ins. If that doesn't make sense, let me know. We'll move on to some other questions. Thanks everyone for your wonderful questions. All right, so we have a question. Let's see, I have a band track and a vocal track. They have slightly different tempo and are off and kind of differ from each other. And is there a way to kind of fix that? So let's go ahead and take a look at an example. And a lot of times what happens is if you have a live band track, you're going to have varying tempo. And this varying tempo can do some interesting things when trying to adjust different tempos. So let's say if we play back a particular project here, and I turn on my click track, there's no real correlation between a click and the audio material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, let's say, in here, just like a drum overhead channel. So I'll select that. And then we could do something here called tempo detection. And you could use like a kick drum or overhead tracks, sometimes guitar tracks if it, and then so some rhythmically significant part. And then I'm going to click on Analyze. And what this is going to do is it's going to figure out kind of the tempo of the material. So we play it back here. And it places it in, so it's figured out the tempo map, and we see our tempo map is almost fluctuating every single beat here. So what I want to do is I'm going to move, it creates a time signature track as well as our tempo track. And what I want to do first is find kind of where the downbeat is. So let's say I'll just kind of, okay, so it's going to be, looks like, listen to it one time. Okay, so this is going to be our downbeat of our 4/4. So we'll see if we got this right. Okay, so now we kind of have figured out the tempo map. Now we can see that the tempo is fluctuating. So let's say if you have the band performance and you have the lead vocal performance, you may have to kind of do that separately on different tempo maps. And you could have different tempo maps in different track versions. So what I want to do is I'm going to select like all band performances here. And as we do this, if you go to the audio menu and under advanced, there's a function that says set definition from tempo. So I'm going to hit the wrong function. So under advanced, so we see this option, set definition from tempo. So most times audio files will have a static tempo value, but if it's fluctuating, we have these options where we could embed the tempo information within the files or within the project, either way. So you'd probably want to do that for the lead vocal that's out of time with the rest of the band tracks. And then what that's done is it's embedded the metadata, the tempo changes of every single beat on the selected audio files. So we'll see, take just a second here. All right, and then once that's done, at this point I could put in any tempo that I want. So I could turn off my tempo track. So if I wanted to be 156 beats a minute or 120, or if I want to take tempo here and slow it down, or speed it up. So what it's doing is it's going to basically take the tempo variations, the variations in tempo embedded as metadata for the vocal file, embed the tempo variations of the instrumental tracks as metadata, and then these will all follow the master tempo that you type in. So the lead vocal will then follow the band performance if you wanted to. Once again, you go to under the audio menu, advanced, again select the file that you want, and then you want to choose set definition from tempo. So that will allow you to have a lead vocal that's at one tempo matched up with a lead backing track at another tempo. So I'm getting a question, what OS am I running, and am I running into any video issues? I'm just running 10.10, I think, on my Mac. I don't think I've changed it. I'm just running Yosemite 10.10.2. And I don't have any video issues on my Mac. I've seen reports of it. I know there's discussions, you know, and seemingly the same exact systems, one having some video performance issues and others not. So I know that they're doing a lot of research in that as we speak to find a common issue. But I don't have it on my system at all. So, all right, scroll through some of our questions. Okay, so just reading through some of our comments. Okay, so I think Nick had a question about contact, about your contact performance in Mac. So if you could just if you could just type the comment, your question again in the field, in the comments field, I'll get to it so I don't have to scroll because we have hundreds of comments now. Sorry if I missed your question. Let me just go back, review a little bit. Okay, so we have a question. Any idea how to create a MIDI logical preset to add a value of 10 to any specific controller? Okay, so let's take a look at this. So I think we could do this quite easily in a logical editor. And we have in the Q&A series, I just did a video. It hasn't been posted yet on the logical editor and kind of how to use it with some kind of different practical examples. So look forward to that. And, one of the things we are doing is taking little, portions of the Hangouts, and, if it's like an interesting question, a lot of people could benefit from doing the Q&A series. So if there's topics that you want covered, like a specific video tutorial on a particular topic, we'd be happy to do it as a Q&A series. So let's say I'm going to have some controllers here. Okay, so I'm just going to make my controller lane a little larger. And let's say we're going to have modulation. All right, so let's say we wanted to add a value of 10 to all the automation points using the logical editor. So how can we do that? So let's come to your logical editor. So we're going to say type is equal to controller, and then we could say value 2. We want it to add 10. So let's see what happens if we... So that's all you'd have to do, and you could save that as a preset. So once again, if you want to do this for all controllers, and be cognizant that polypressure, program change, aftertouch, pitch bend aren't standard MIDI continuous controllers. They're system common messages. So at that point, you may just have to, choose instead of controller program change. So really simple to add a value of 10 to any of your MIDI CCs, regardless of what CC it is, or if you wanted to specify a particular CC, you could say value 1 is equal to, and then choose 1 for modulation if you wanted to, and hit enter. So now when we double click here, again, we define our filter target, what we want to affect, and we say modulation or any controller. And then we say value 2 of that controller is the value, and we wanted to do on our operation set to add a value of 10. So now we can just come here and just do that with the logical editor. So very easy to set up with the logical editor, and look for a logical editor Q&A video. We just got it done a couple weeks ago. I'm not sure when it will be posted. They're kind of rolling them out over time, but look for that. But that's a way to do that in the logical editor. Let's go through some of our questions. I had a question dealing with markers, and this is from Taylor. Let's say if we have a marker track, And let's say I have a number of different markers here. Let's just turn this off, and let's say I'll just drop in some different markers like so. And he mentioned that it used to be easier in previous versions to name the markers. So when you come here, you could actually just open up the marker editor, and then if you double click in one of the fields, you could type in the name. And Taylor mentioned that in 7.5 you could hit the down key, and that would take them directly to the next field to name. All you have to do now is to actually just hit the tab key, and you hit it 3 times, and then you could just type in the name. So you could change the marker number, the marker time, or change the name field. So the tab key will just allow you to navigate to name your markers like that, like previous ways. So while we're there, that's an easy way to kind of work on the markers like so. Okay, so just reading through some of the questions. We have a bunch more questions to get to. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. So a question from Jeremy on any words of an updated version of the CC121 controller. I'd love to see a better controller to MCU, but more modernized. Mackie controls out of date. I haven't heard of any plans, but I'm sure that there's people working on stuff and always thinking about it. So there is obviously the Nuage range of controllers, and I realize that's probably out of price range for a lot of people, but it does some amazing integration with Cubase and Nuendo. But I realize that you probably want something more in the CC121 price range, so we understand that. We have a question: is the live chat available afterwards? I think that the live chat gets shut off when the broadcast ends. So question: how do I use the wah wah plugin on my guitar track? You don't hear it at all. Make sure that it is turned on. So it sounds like a dumb thing to say, but it's not always as obvious when you have the guitar track. So I'll show you. So just to make sure that you have it on so that you see the red light. Now, it also could be if you don't hear it while you're playing, and often people would do this while they're playing their guitar live. Depending on if your audio interface is set to direct monitoring. So direct monitoring basically takes the audio input signal and passes it directly to the outputs, bypassing the effects engines and the audio engine, and that's what gives you that almost near latency-free mode. So the direct monitoring. So make sure that you have direct monitoring turned off if you don't hear the effect of the wah wah. So question, will Cubase ever get the open last project on startup option? And someone said they love that. I thought it was still there. I haven't looked in a long time, but let's take a look. I thought it was under general. I'll mention that and pass it along. So question, can we make a hangout separately about Halligan 6? Yeah, we'll try to get one done maybe towards the end of summer on Halligan 6. So it's pretty involved, as you know. All right, so just going through some of the comments that were sent in, make sure. Okay, so we had a question about quantizing MIDI to the audio grid. So if you kind of, what we just did with the jazz track a couple minutes ago, once you kind of have that lined up with the tempo, the MIDI should line up and be quantizable fairly easy to the tempo that was extracted from the audio part. Question, can we load audio sample loops into Groove Agent 4 and then play them using the pattern player? Yeah, you can. So when we come to Groove Agent 4, we'll just load it up here. Actually, I'll just open up a project. Oh, I'll just take a loop. So I could just take any of the audio files here and just drag it directly to an instrument pad and be able to trigger that. Now, what's kind of cool, if you wanted to, you could also just go to the slice menu, and then we could create slices. And as it does that, it automatically will just kind of take your different slices of your audio. Let me just find a... Just cut this real quick. So now you can just drag and drop audio directly right onto it. And now if you wanted to just kind of create the slices, you could adjust kind of the threshold and the sensitivity. But now that will create a pattern. And you could have that pattern, you could just drag and drop and trigger that pattern. Or if you wanted to, you know, at that point, just drag and drop that pattern directly onto your project window, you could do that as well. So we have a question, can you still use step entry of MIDI notes when you play a chord? Yeah, all you have to do is, as you do it, just hit a chord. So a question, okay, so a question regarding about Kontakt. I'm just going to read this, move the microphone so I can read it a little better. I wanted to know, and this is Nick asked about his Kontakt, the most efficient way to run Kontakt Cubase on a Mac and Logic, for example. It's best to run one string articulation per track because that accesses multi-processing best. It would probably, you know, it's really, some plugins will scale across multi-processors better. It's not really so much a host thing at that point. It's going to be how the plugin is written. Some plugins are written to scale across multi-cores very well, some aren't. And while Cubase can scale across, a lot of people will choose to, you know, that methodology may work, but you may also want to have, you know, multiple articulations handled through the expression maps. So what I would suggest, because I don't run Kontakt on my Mac, is to, you know, just set up a, you know, a quick scenario. I know you probably want to do this before you spend, you know, a week building a large orchestral template, but you could set up just kind of a, you know, a quick test to see which way works better. So you might, you know, depending on how it's going to scale, it would probably scale across the processors in the same way as it does in different host applications. There might be some slight differences between AU and VST versions. I believe that the Kontakt still isn't a VST3, so it's not going to do the suspension of processing when nothing is happening. So you don't have some of the limitations of the later technologies offered for the last almost 10 years now with VST3 from Kontakt, I believe. But you know, I would set up just a small scale test and just, you know, duplicate those tracks and see if you notice a performance increase. A lot of people will tend to do, you know, multiple articulations on one particular track, and use the VST expression maps, which you don't have the benefit of really using in other sequencers. So that could make so you could definitely run multi-patches, but, you know, try just a small scale test, and you could duplicate the tracks and see how that's going to scale across. I can't give you a really definitive answer because I don't run it on my Mac or my PC. Sorry, I wish I could give you kind of a better answer to that. Okay, so reading through some other questions, comments here. Okay, so reading, someone says, I love Nuage, best hardware, so. Okay, so the question is, when will there be more than 16 default colors available in Cubase? Okay, so with Cubase, you know, it comes with 16, but you can make, a lot of people don't know that you can make your own colors, and you could have more than 16. So if you just go to your project colors, all you have to do is come here and just add more colors. So you could just say append new color, append new color, append new color, and then at this point you could choose kind of anywhere on the color wheel that you want for that color. So you can make all of your own colors quite easily. So you're not limited to 16. It comes with 16 that are kind of designed to look good together. But you know, knock your socks off if you want to make 128 different colors. You're free to do that and save that within your preferences quite easily. So. And we see, does Cubase use AU or only VST? Cubase uses only VST, so it's by far kind of the you know, more superior plugin format on the market, and we invented it. And if you're, you know, maybe we could have a bunch of people create different color presets. I know it has 16, but you could obviously make more. So probably in the time you wrote the message, you could have made 10 more colors. But I understand you want more. Okay, so so some other questions that were mailed in we should get to. Okay, so here's an interesting question that someone sent in. I have a question regarding navigating the MIDI editor, specifically the key and drum editor. I've asked in the forum and requested the option as a feature request, no luck. Perhaps you can assist. I said, here's what I'm trying to do. Let's say I'm in a drum editor and I click on a note, some exotic drum hit near the beginning of the song, and let's say it's on C3 or whatever. The next instance of this sound or hit appears much later on in the song without having to manually scroll the screen and find it visually. I'd like to immediately navigate to the next instance of the MIDI note along the timeline. And there isn't a function to do this directly in the key. Sorry about that. In the key editor or the logical or the MIDI drum editor, but the list editor does this very well. So if you wanted to, let's say we have some MIDI notes. And let's say I'll just switch this over to drum editor. And say I just have a lot of different drum notes going on. Okay, so if you go to the MIDI and then go to the list editor, at this point you have a little filter menu that you could activate just by turning on filters here. And then once you have that filter turned on, at this point you can say, okay, I want to select every note that's D2. So I could select this event and I want to filter event types and data 1. And then I only see all my D2s. And at that point you can just navigate very quickly to that next note that's specified by that MIDI note number, which and value 1 to pitch, just to do that. So while it's not in the key editor or drum editor, and you might be able to make a logical editor preset, you could just do it really fast in the list editor to accomplish that task. Okay, so let's go through some of the other questions that were mailed in. Okay, so here's a good question. I think this is from Taylor. When I zoom in a track and move the horizontal scroll bar, it's too sensitive. Is there a way to kind of do this? Is there a way to kind of have this? So let's say if I'm in, I'll just go to a project that we're in here. I'll activate this. So let's say, and I could do this in any of the editors or the project window. Let's say I zoom in, and a lot of people will kind of navigate by taking the little line here at the bottom. And if I find, again, that's too sensitive, if you just hold down the shift key while you do the mouse scroll, you could just navigate back and forth very easily. And this could be on the main project window. So I get this question from a game composer who's freaking out over it. It's like when they're editing all their music, you know, they're like, oh, okay, when I want to jump back, it's too sensitive. How can I just do that? Just hold down your shift key, and then you could navigate horizontally like so. And our question from Taylor was, is there a preference to set the export audio mix down that will default to the project parameters? Oftentimes I inadvertently export to the unintended sampling rate, bit depth, and folder because it defaults to the previous project settings. There isn't a preference for that, but just, you know, be aware that when you do an export audio mix down, that, you know, just to set the path and bit depth at that point for each one. So I could pass that on as a feature request to, you know, have it default to the project folder and maybe to like a subfolder called mixes or something like that. If that makes sense to you, Taylor, just let me know. But there isn't a preference for that. All right, let me scroll through some more comments. Okay, so just reading through some comments and other questions. Okay, so a question about when recording MIDI from an external MIDI device into Cubase, and so recording the audio, there's a few milliseconds, and that may actually be kind of, those few milliseconds may be tied to the delay compensation. So I think, I'm not sure if there's a way to do that, but you might want to see if toggling the delay, the time compensation delay may make a difference. I'm not sure if it will, but you know, if it's coming in on time, I think it's okay. You could always trim the file by dragging the bottom left locator over. Okay, so I'm seeing people request for a second ruler, like a ruler track within the MIDI editor. So let me just take a look at something here real quick. Don't think I have any MIDI tracks on here. Let me just. Okay, so you want to see 2 different time formats as well. The one thing that you could do, you know, you have kind of, it's not seeing 2 at the same time, but there is a key command to toggle between the primary and secondary time display formats. If you have one in SMPTE time code or seconds and one in bars and beats, you can toggle time. Let me just see if we can find a key command to do that. I know you don't see it both at once. Just look under toggle. So I'm pretty sure there's a key command that you can toggle back and forth between the secondary and primary display. So maybe that would be helpful in that scenario. One thing you could also do is if you have the in-place editor active, let me just see if we have it on the track controls. And then here, if you wanted to add different ruler tracks, so that's another way of kind of doing it. May not be the most ideal solution, but if you absolutely needed it, but I'll pass that along. Okay, so there's a question about adding a delay time between events in a macro. And sometimes what I do is you can often sometimes create a little bit of a delay by opening and closing a window. And I know that this is kind of a workaround. So a lot of times I may open, close or open the transport window like 2 or 3 times, and that will give a delay for a window to pop up to then have a function. So try opening and closing windows several times, and that could often add a little bit of enough of a delay for another element of a macro to take effect once something has been opened up or been activated. So you could try that. So question is if you can hide the transport panel at the bottom, all you have to do is just hit in Cubase 9 and Nuendo 8, it's Alt Control or Command Control T, and that will hide and close the transport. So if you don't want to see that there, it's in your way, you want the screen real estate, yes, you could do it just like that. In regards to let the developers know about the delay, I've set it to kind of our product planning guys that request for a while, so I'm sure they're familiar with it. Okay, so just reading a couple questions. So is there a way to pick off just the left or right channel of a stereo VSTI to feed a mono track? You could send it to a mono group, and then just like we kind of did earlier, take the output of that group as the input. So you could just set it to a mono group. Okay, so a question about compressing velocity lanes from the logical editor. So let's just give that a try here. Let me just... So an easy way of doing it, not in the logical editor, is to just from the Midi modifiers, and here you could compress the velocities, but let's see if we could do it in a logical editor. Okay, so let's say, just blow these out. Okay, so we're going to say value 2. All right, so I'm just going to reread the question one more time. Okay, so let me see. I'm not sure if... Okay, so what I think this will do is take the notes that are equal in velocity just choose all velocity events. So I think this is kind of close. I'll play around with this if you want to email me. But I think if you didn't want to do the compress your velocities here, they could set up a condition similar to this, where basically you want to say we're going to take the velocities and we're going to take and then we could take the average velocity and then kind of compress it by 0.75. But it might be just easier to kind of just do your velocity compression just right here on the info line. So, but if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.net, I'd be happy to kind of play around with the preset some more. The question was, will there be a Lua scripting in Cubase or Nuendo like we have in Halion? I haven't heard of any plans for that. So I haven't heard of anything, but we never know. All right, so we have a question about copying and pasting effects chain presets. So let's go ahead and set up a project for that. All right, so I'm not sure if this is like for inserts that you want it for, but and I know you can kind of do it. I'm not sure how to do multiple ones, kind of having a brain cramp on it. But at that point, you could just, I think you could save it as a effects chain preset and paste it. Or, but you could also save it as a preset. I think I'll see if I can figure out how to do copy multiple ones over. All right, we'll do the last question. I'm gonna have to get going. Okay, so the question is about offline processing. You can't really do it in Cubase. I think you could do it in like Nuendo 7. It's kind of set up where you could save the batch process. Now, we had a question on just seeing left and right meters independently. So let's take a quick look at that. I'll just do this with a drum loop really quickly. Okay, so we have this, and let's set this up. Okay. So let me just check the meters preferences and see if we can see the numeric values for the left and right. So I don't see a way of doing showing the numeric values. Maybe if we do, we'll check in the control room meters. Yes, I don't see a numeric representation of the meters. All right, so with that, I'll look at one more quick question and then I'm gonna have to wrap up. Okay, so I'm just saying, why are there empty images? Let me just read this. This will be our last question and we'll wrap up. Why are there empty images in audio folders on my desktop when I close a Cubase project, and is there a way to stop it? It could be, depending on how you're starting. If you're starting off with a project, maybe the project was stored onto, or you're starting the template from the desktop, and make sure that you're not defining the project folder to the desktop as well. So it sounds like maybe like in your initial project setup, something was defined to the desktop. Otherwise, it wouldn't create it there. So, all right, with that, we've gone about 3 hours. We've gone a little over 3 hours, so we're just going to go ahead and wrap it up. I'd like to thank everyone for participating. Thank you all for the wonderful questions. If you want to email questions in for other Hangouts in the future, you can always send them to clubcubase@steinberg.net. If there's a question I didn't answer correctly or if I misunderstood, you could let me know. Or if you want me to follow up on a particular subject, I'm happy to do that as well. So I'd like to thank everyone for participating in Hangout and all the wonderful questions. We're hoping to do another one maybe towards the end of the week of the 17th, so maybe 2 weeks from today. We'll try to do another Hangout, so we'll be announcing it. Also, if you have topics for... we're doing the Q&A series of videos on the Cubase YouTube channel. I think 5 more were posted today. It's July 5th. And we could take like little sections that you want more, something to go back and just watch that one particular area. Please feel free again to email those to clubcubase@steinberg.net. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks again. I hope that everyone has learned a couple of tips and tricks and is... figured out some handy things to make their workflow a little better. And with that, we'll go ahead and choose to wrap up. So we'll just come right over here and stop the broadcast. Thank you very much.